The air inside the ABC headquarters was thick with tension, the scent of freshly brewed coffee doing little to mask the underlying anxiety that clung to the newsroom like a storm cloud. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, cars honking, pedestrians rushing through crosswalks, but inside, behind layers of glass walls and corporate polish, a different kind of chaos was unfolding. Just when everyone thought the storm had passed, Karoline Leavitt shattered the illusion of calm once again. Her first lawsuit had already sent The View into a tailspin, ripping open the show's carefully curated facade and exposing the fractures that network executives had desperately tried to patch over. It had been a public relations nightmare, a legal minefield, and a test of damage control that pushed ABC to its limits. Yet somehow, no one had foreseen what was coming next, because this time, Karoline wasn't just fighting back, she was going for the kill. The breaking news tore through the industry like wildfire. Karoline Leavitt had filed another lawsuit. Not a strategic bluff, not a desperate last attempt. This was a full-scale legal assault, calculated, relentless, and impossible to ignore. The airwaves flooded with speculation, analysts scrambled to dissect the implications, and social media erupted in a frenzy of reactions. The View had barely begun to recover from the first wave, and now they were about to drown. For Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar, the initial reaction was disbelief, a stunned silence stretching just long enough for the weight of the revelation to sink in. They had convinced themselves the worst was over, that their network's lawyers had done enough, that the outrage would fade into yesterday's news cycle. But Karoline wasn't playing by their rules. This wasn't just a legal dispute anymore, it was a reckoning. And this time, the cost of losing wasn't just a dent in their reputations. It was something far more dangerous, the potential collapse of their entire empire. The legal papers hit the network like a wrecking ball. This wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a public autopsy of The View's inner workings, the kind of expose that left network executives scrambling and high-powered attorneys reaching for the nearest bottle of whiskey. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just demanding damages, she was pulling the curtains back on an industry that had long thrived on its own impunity. The accusations were brutal, merciless, and backed by a mountain of evidence. Court documents detailed a meticulously executed strategy to not only humiliate her on air, but to silence her entirely. Email chains stretched for pages, revealing top brass discussing how to frame her as problematic, a convenient industry term for someone who won't play by their rules. Text messages between producers read like a script from a political thriller. Media execs, showrunners, and well-placed journalists all conspiring to make sure she never worked in television again. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, they did. Because buried within the court filings was a revelation that sent ABC's legal team into cardiac arrest: secret recordings. Not speculation, not rumor, actual unfiltered, on-the-record conversations detailing how The View's hosts and executives orchestrated an entire smear campaign, knowing full well they were twisting facts beyond recognition. These weren't offhand remarks. They were calculated, deliberate, and intended to destroy a career. Karoline's legal team wasn't just taking them to court, they were setting the entire system on fire. And the kicker? She wasn't asking for a slap on the wrist. She was coming for the network's bank account, a figure so large, so potentially devastating, that boardroom discussions were no longer about how to fight the case, but whether The View could even afford to exist if they lost. The moment Karoline Leavitt's second lawsuit hit the headlines, The View's set transformed from a polished stage of carefully curated outrage into a battlefield of whispered panic and barely contained fury. Producers scrambled, flipping through legal memos as if the answer to their nightmare was hidden between the lines. Calls poured in from network higher-ups, demanding damage control, immediate, effective, and absolute. But the truth? There was no containing this. This wasn't just another messy headline to spin. This was a legal wrecking ball swinging straight for the show's foundation. Backstage, Whoopi Goldberg had just stepped into the green room when her phone buzzed with a call she never wanted to take, an executive's voice tight with urgency, words clipped, barely veiling the desperation beneath them. A lawsuit, not just bad, catastrophic. The kind that could take the whole ship down. For a beat, she stood there, expression unreadable, before turning on her heel and marching straight to her dressing room, slamming the door behind her. Joy Behar's reaction was almost comical. She waved a dismissive hand when someone mentioned the lawsuit, rolling her eyes like it was just another conservative grift. "Oh, please," she scoffed, flipping through the latest show notes, barely looking up. "She's desperate for attention." Then she saw the lawsuit itself, and suddenly her smug amusement curdled into something darker. It was all there. Allegations backed by hard evidence, a lawsuit that didn't just accuse the View of defamation, but outlined a coordinated effort to sabotage a career. There were receipts, emails, texts, even testimony from insiders willing to speak under oath. Joy put the papers down, her fingers twitching slightly as she reached for her phone. Meanwhile, the pre-show production meeting was unraveling fast. Sunny Hostin wasted no time confronting the producers, eyes flashing with anger. "How long have you known?" Her voice cut through the room, sharp enough to make the assistant director flinch. "Because if this has been in the works for weeks and no one warned us, we have a problem." Across the table, Elisa Farah Griffin stayed quiet. She'd been down this road before, seen the cracks in the show's armor. She wasn't about to defend them this time. Sarah Haynes kept glancing at her phone, refreshing news feeds with a sense of dread, as if somewhere out there a last-minute miracle might appear and make it all go away. Spoiler, it wouldn't. Outside the chaos of the studio, ABC's corporate offices were in freefall. The View had always been a high-risk, high-reward gamble. Controversy fueled its relevance. But now the math wasn't adding up anymore. If Karoline won this case, if even half of what was in those legal documents held up in court, the payout wouldn't just be painful, it would be crippling. At what point, some executives whispered behind closed doors, does this show stop being worth the cost? For the first time in years, no one had an answer. For all their years in television, neither Whoopi Goldberg nor Joy Behar had ever faced a crisis quite like this. The cameras had barely stopped rolling when Whoopi stormed off set, her face a mask of controlled fury. By the time she reached her dressing room, that control snapped. The door slammed shut behind her, rattling the frame toward lining the hallway. Inside, she paced, phone in hand, thumb tapping furiously against the screen as she fired off messages to her legal team. Calls went unanswered, or worse, were met with vague, unsettling silence. ABC's lawyers were already scrambling, and Whoopi knew what that meant. They didn't have a plan. That was unacceptable. Her voice cut through the room as she finally got someone on the line. "Are you kidding me? Again? Who let this happen?" Her words weren't questions, they were demands. Someone had dropped the ball, and she was going to find out who. She blamed the network's legal team for failing to contain Karoline the first time. She blamed the producers for not keeping her in the loop. But most of all, she blamed Karoline Leavitt. The anger in her voice was sharp, almost rehearsed, as she spat out the words, "She's dangerous. She's vindictive, and she's hell-bent on burning this show to the ground." But beneath the outrage was something much more dangerous. Fear. Because Whoopi had been in this industry long enough to recognize a losing battle. Meanwhile, Joy Behar was unraveling in her own way. At first she had laughed off the lawsuit, waving it away like an annoying tabloid rumor. Then she saw the lawsuit, all of it. The legal jargon was bad enough, but the evidence, the detailed accusations, the paper trail, the sheer weight of it, that was different. Her fingers tightened around her phone as she started making calls. She wanted answers. She wanted reassurance. She got neither. ABC's executives weren't confident they could win this fight. That's when it hit her for the first time. This wasn't just bad press. This was a real threat. And Joy Behar had no interest in going down with the ship. By the time the day ended, she had had enough. Storming toward the exit, she threw one final warning over her shoulder to a stunned production assistant. "If we lose this one, I'm done." Between Whoopi's rage and Joy's rising panic, one thing was crystal clear. The View was in serious trouble. ABC's executive war room was drowning in chaos. The meeting had started as a controlled crisis briefing, but that illusion shattered within minutes. Now it was a full-scale meltdown. Voices overlapping, accusations flying across the room, fingers pointing in every direction except inward. A senior VP, normally the picture of composure, was practically shaking with fury as he shoved a stack of leaked emails across the table. "Somebody tell me," he growled, his voice dangerously low, "how the hell we didn't see this coming?" No one answered. He wasn't looking for an answer. He was looking for a target. "Do you have any idea what we're dealing with here?" he continued, jabbing a finger at the legal documents spread across the table. "This isn't some baseless Twitter rant. This is a coordinated legal assault with actual receipts." His voice rose, booming off the glass walls. How did we let it get this far? Across the table, ABC's head of legal exhaled sharply, hands clasped together as if silently praying for divine intervention. Because, she said, voice clipped, we didn't take her seriously. A deadly silence fell over the room. The VP's jaw clenched so tightly it looked like he might break a tooth. Say that again. The legal advisor didn't flinch. We didn't take her seriously, she repeated, each word landing like a hammer. We laughed her off, brushed it aside, assumed it was just another conservative meltdown we could ride out. She leaned forward, pressing both palms against the table. And now it's too late to ignore her. The weight of those words sank in like a stone. ABC's PR chief, who had been sitting in near silence, finally spoke up, his voice tight, strained. This lawsuit, it's not just about money. It's not just about the View. If even half of what's in those recordings gets aired out in court, we're talking about a scandal that drags in the entire network. He took a breath, glancing around the room. You all understand what that means, right? More silence, because they did understand. This wasn't just the View's crisis anymore. It was ABC's. And if they didn't contain it soon, it was going to burn everything down with it. ABC knew they had a problem. They had handled scandals before, lawsuits, controversies, bad headlines. They'd weathered political storms, public backlash, and the occasional off-the-rails live segment that sent Twitter into a frenzy. But this was different. This wasn't a tabloid story that would die in a 24-hour news cycle. It had teeth. The crisis response team wasted no time drawing up a damage control strategy. Step 1. Downplay the lawsuit. Release a carefully worded non-statement acknowledge the legal action without actually admitting any wrongdoing. Step 2. Silence the hosts. No on-air mentions, no off-the-cuff comments, no emotional outbursts that could fuel the fire. Step 3. Contact Karoline's legal team. See if a quiet settlement could make this all go away before it escalated into a full-scale media disaster. But there was one massive problem. Karoline wasn't interested in a settlement. When an ABC representative reached out, the response came back fast and brutal. Karoline has nothing to say to you. We'll see you in court. That's when real panic set in. Because if she wasn't taking the money, if she wasn't interested in making this disappear, that meant she was in it for the fight. And worse, the public was on her side. The moment the lawsuit hit the headlines, the internet exploded. Within minutes, Karoline's name was everywhere. Karoline versus The View, ABC in crisis, justice for Karoline, The View exposed. The trend wasn't just viral, it was a movement. Conservative media wasted zero time going for the kill. Fox News plastered the headline across their homepage, Karoline Leavitt files bombshell lawsuit against The View. This time she's not holding back. The Daily Wire ran a headline that practically dripped with satisfaction. ABC executives in full panic mode. What are they hiding? Independent commentators were having a field day. One popular YouTuber went live, shaking his head as he read through the details. Look, I knew The View was bad, but this is next-level corruption. Liberal outlets scrambled to control the narrative. CNN called it a political stunt. MSNBC suggested she was weaponizing the courts for attention. The New York Times floated a theory that shadowy conservative donors were behind the lawsuit. But the problem? No one was buying it. Viewers didn't need to be told what to think. They could see the evidence themselves. They read the leaked emails, they heard the off recordings, they watched Karoline stand her ground in real time. And the verdict? They were siding with her. The comment sections were brutal. The View has been lying for years, and they're finally getting exposed. ABC thought they could silence her. Now she's about to make them pay. I've never even watched The View, but this lawsuit is making me hate them even more. You have to be really bad for someone to sue you twice. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, the memes started rolling in. Someone photoshopped Whoopi Goldberg holding a sign that read, "Lawsuit incoming." A clip of Joy Behar fake laughing got repurposed with the caption, "Joy when she realizes she might actually get fired this time." By noon, ABC's headquarters had been edited to look like it was on fire. By midday, the lawsuit was the #1 trending topic in America. By nightfall, conservative media had non-stop coverage. By the end of the week, the lawsuit had completely taken over the news cycle. And ABC, they were losing badly. Because no amount of spin, damage control, or PR tricks could stop the storm. The internet had already picked a side, and this time, it wasn't with The View. The lawsuit wasn't fading, it was gaining momentum. For years, The View had managed to survive scandals, controversies, and even on-air blow-ups that made headlines for all the wrong reasons. But this was different, because this wasn't about a bad take, a heated argument, or even an offensive remark that could be swept under the rug. This was a lawsuit with teeth, and it was putting ABC in a position they had never faced before. Behind the scenes, the network was spiraling. Internal emails were leaking by the hour, revealing executives in full-blown panic mode, scrambling to figure out how to control the story before it controlled them. Emergency meetings were called, the usual PR strategies were thrown around, damage control, deflection, silence, but nothing seemed enough to contain the fire. And the most damaging part? Top ABC executives were furious, not just at the lawsuit, but at Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar for dragging the network into yet another public relations catastrophe. The backlash wasn't just coming from one side anymore. Major advertisers were getting cold feet, some quietly pulling their sponsorships, others demanding answers. Because in television, scandals can be cleaned up, but financial losses? That's a different story. If sponsors started walking, the show wasn't just in trouble, it was on the chopping block. Ratings had already been slipping, forcing The View to lean harder and harder into controversy just to stay relevant. But this time, it backfired spectacularly. Viewers who had once defended the show were now questioning their loyalty. Conservative audiences, long dismissed by ABC, were now leading the charge to get the show canceled altogether. And then, the biggest red flag yet. Rumors started circulating within the network, whispers of a major shakeup at The View. Some claimed ABC was considering firing key hosts. Others suggested the unthinkable, that the network was debating whether to shut the show down completely. One industry insider put it bluntly, "The View is on life support. If this lawsuit gains any more traction, ABC might have no choice but to pull the plug." For the first time in decades, cancellation was a real possibility. Whoopi and Joy tried to brush off the reports, acting as if it was just another media cycle that would blow over, but privately they were panicking, because the truth was written all over the walls. ABC couldn't afford another lawsuit. ABC couldn't afford another scandal. ABC couldn't afford to keep bleeding viewers. For years, The View had survived by stirring up drama, but now the drama was consuming them. And the one person responsible for backing them into this corner, Karoline Leavitt. She had torn through the show's carefully crafted image. She had forced the network into a choice it never thought it would have to make. Would ABC stand by its embattled hosts, knowing it could cost them everything? Or would they cut ties to save themselves? Because at this point, it wasn't just about one lawsuit, it was about whether The View could survive at all. As the lawsuit shook the media landscape, everyone was waiting for Karoline's next move. Would she negotiate? Would she ease up? Would she give ABC and The View an escape route? The answer came quickly. No. Karoline Leavitt wasn't playing defense anymore. She was on the attack. For too long, she had watched the mainstream media twist narratives, distort facts, and silence voices they didn't approve of. Now she was flipping the script. Karoline Leavitt wasn't waiting for The View to make its next move. She was already 10 steps ahead. While ABC scrambled behind closed doors, she doubled down, making it clear that this wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a fight for something much bigger. She wasn't speaking in riddles or hiding behind rehearsed PR statements. She was direct, relentless, and impossible to ignore. For years, The View has gotten away with twisting the truth and silencing those who don't fall in line, she said. They've attacked people with no pushback, believing they could say anything without consequences. That ends now. The response? A media firestorm. Her words spread like wildfire across social media, amplified by journalists, political commentators, and everyday people who had grown tired of networks pushing their own narratives unchecked. Within hours, the hashtags exploded again. The movement wasn't just conservative voices rallying behind her anymore. It was people across the political spectrum who saw what was happening and recognized the hypocrisy. Meanwhile, ABC was in full damage control mode, but the crisis was too big to contain. And then, the leak that changed everything. A major conservative outlet obtained and published secret recordings from inside ABC's corporate headquarters. The audio was devastating. An ABC executive could be heard saying, "We should have shut this down sooner. This lawsuit could expose more than just The View. If we don't regain control, this could pull back the curtain on how we manage these situations at the network level. It was the final confirmation of what critics had been saying all along. ABC wasn't just caught off guard, they were genuinely afraid of what this lawsuit could uncover. This wasn't just about The View anymore. Karoline had put the entire network under scrutiny, and the worst part for ABC? She wasn't backing down. That same week, she stepped up to the podium at a press event and made it crystal clear, this lawsuit isn't just about me, it's about truth, it's about accountability, and it's about holding the media to the same standards they impose on everyone else. The audience roared. The press scrambled to keep up. ABC, they had no response, because there was nothing they could say that would change the reality of what was unfolding. For the first time, The View wasn't the one controlling the narrative, and that reality was crushing them from the inside out. Behind the scenes, producers were arguing over damage control, legal teams were sending frantic emails, and top executives were desperately trying to contain a crisis that refused to die down. And yet, Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar still believed they could talk their way out of it. They decided to fight back, on air, to take on Karoline directly. It was a career-defining mistake. The next episode of The View aired with a level of unease that even their most devoted viewers couldn't ignore. Whoopi sat stiffly, barely able to mask her irritation. "I just want to say something real quick," she started, voice laced with forced composure. "This whole lawsuit, it's ridiculous. We've always been about open discussions. We welcome all viewpoints." Joy leaned in, shaking her head. "Come on, this is a political stunt. Some people just can't handle strong women speaking their minds, so they run to the courts and play victim." The audience clapped, but not with the same enthusiasm as before. Something felt different. Maybe it was the tension in Whoopi's voice. Maybe it was Joy's forced sarcasm. Or maybe it was because people weren't buying it anymore. Within minutes, social media exploded. "So let me get this straight. Whoopi and Joy are claiming they welcome all viewpoints? The same Whoopi who walked off set when a guest disagreed with her? Joy Behar accusing Karoline of playing the victim? That's funny, considering she spent years screaming over anyone who challenges her opinions. This is pure damage control, and it's failing." And then, the moment that destroyed their credibility completely, Joy, clearly fed up, sneered. "Oh, this is what they always do. Come on our show, stir up drama, then run back to conservative media and cry about it." Whoopi laughed, shaking her head. "Yeah, it's the same game every time. They just want attention." That was it. That one exchange unraveled everything. Within hours, clips from Karoline's interviews resurfaced, calm, fact-driven, and full of hard evidence. People compared the two side by side. Whoopi and Joy mocking Karoline, while Karoline presented her case with proof in hand. The result? Karoline came out looking credible. Whoopi and Joy? Exposed. At first, ABC executives tried to ride it out. Then the backlash kept growing. Then an internal memo leaked revealing that network executives had told The View's hosts to stop talking about the lawsuit immediately. The message was clear. ABC knew they had lost control. But Whoopi and Joy ignored it. They thought they could out-talk the controversy. Instead, they made it worse. ABC was forced to act. They pulled the episode from streaming platforms. They deleted clips from The View's official YouTube channel. They issued a warning, stop escalating or face consequences. For years, Whoopi and Joy had dominated the conversation, drowned out opposing voices, and dictated what narratives survived in the media cycle. But now, they were the ones on the defensive. And for the first time, they couldn't talk their way out of it. Whoopi and Joy are panicking because they've never been held accountable before, one commenter wrote. They can't silence Karoline like they've silenced everyone else. That's why they're scared. ABC had a choice to make. Keep defending Whoopi and Joy and risk The View collapsing entirely, or cut them loose to save themselves. And Karoline? She had proven her point without saying another word. ABC had run out of places to hide. The fallout from Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit wasn't just a public relations disaster. It was turning into a full-scale industry reckoning. The network had miscalculated from the start. They assumed it would blow over, that the outrage would burn itself out, that they could control the narrative, like they always had. They were wrong, because this time the controversy wasn't disappearing. The internet refused to move on. Every attempt by Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar to shift the blame only brought more scrutiny, forcing people to rewatch the original clips and examine the View's track record. And the more they watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about Karoline. This was about The View itself, a show that had spent years attacking, silencing, and dismissing voices it didn't agree with, only to now find itself backed into a corner, unable to escape accountability. And ABC? They were being forced to confront a question they had never dared to ask before. Was it still worth protecting Whoopi and Joy if it meant burning the entire network down with them? The panic inside ABC's corporate offices was now impossible to ignore. Emergency meetings were happening daily. Executives were on back-to-back calls, scrambling to find an off-ramp before this lawsuit spiraled into something they couldn't contain. At first, they floated the idea of forcing Whoopi and Joy to apologize, hoping that a carefully worded statement would calm the storm. But that option had one major flaw. Neither Whoopi nor Joy were willing to play along. According to sources inside ABC, Whoopi was furious about how the network was handling the situation. In a heated conversation with producers, she reportedly snapped, "I'm not apologizing for anything. I've been on this show longer than half of them have been in this building." She wasn't just refusing to back down, she was daring ABC to challenge her. But the network wasn't just worried about Whoopi and Joy anymore. They were terrified of what would happen next, because if this lawsuit made it to court, if Karoline's legal team forced The View to answer for its treatment of conservative guests under oath, then this wasn't just going to be about one lawsuit. It was going to be about everything they had buried over the years. And that was a nightmare scenario. Already, rumors were swirling about past guests who had been silenced, topics that had been shut down, and executives who had helped orchestrate behind-the-scenes smear campaigns. The floodgates were starting to crack open. And ABC wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. Major advertisers were beginning to rethink their sponsorship deals. Companies that had once been proud to align themselves with The View were now being bombarded with customer complaints, demanding to know why they were still funding a program accused of targeting its conservative guests. And as history had proven time and time again, when advertisers start walking, networks start making cuts. So now ABC was facing a decision they had never considered before. Would they suspend Whoopi and Joy to try to cool the controversy? Would they issue a network-wide statement attempting to distance themselves from their own hosts? Or was the unthinkable finally on the table? For the first time in decades, the one question ABC executives had never dared to ask was now being whispered in their own boardrooms. Was it time to cut ties with Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar for good? And Karoline? She wasn't even close to being finished. The lawsuit had already sent shockwaves through the industry, but those close to Karoline Leavitt's legal team were hinting at something far more significant than just one case. At first, the battle had seemed like a one-on-one fight. Karoline, armed with evidence, standing alone against The View, a show backed by one of the most powerful networks in television. But now it was turning into something much bigger, because Karoline wasn't the only one watching ABC squirm. Rumors had started circulating, whispers in media circles, quiet conversations in newsrooms, and hushed phone calls between former guests who had been steamrolled by the same system. Some had already reached out to Karoline's legal team, asking if this was their moment to come forward. For years, the show had operated under the assumption that they were untouchable, that any backlash would be temporary, that the media cycle would move on, and their critics would eventually fade into obscurity. But what if this time was different? What if Karoline's lawsuit wasn't just a momentary controversy, but a movement waiting to explode? What if this wasn't just about The View? What if this was about the entire mainstream media apparatus, one that had dictated who was heard and who was silenced, who was platformed and who was erased? What if Karoline had lit a match that was about to set the entire industry ablaze? The anxiety within ABC was now undeniable. Boardrooms were filled with executives in crisis mode, debating whether it was still worth protecting the show or if they should cut their losses and let it collapse under its own weight. Legal teams were poring over contracts, discussing the ramifications of a settlement versus the risk of discovery in court. Advertisers were backing away quietly, not wanting their brands associated with what was starting to look less like a media controversy and more like an institutional reckoning. Meanwhile, The View's hosts were in full-blown meltdown mode. Every episode since the lawsuit had been a balancing act, trying to maintain their usual tone while avoiding any direct mention of the lawsuit. But the strain was showing. The live audience reactions were less enthusiastic. Social media was merciless, dissecting their every word, their every expression, their every slip-up. The fans who had once blindly defended them were now questioning everything. And Karoline? She was watching it all unfold, fully aware that she had the upper hand. ABC had lost control of the story. They had lost control of The View's reputation, and if the leaks from Karoline's legal team were true, they were about to lose a whole lot more. Because if even one other former guest stepped forward, if even one more high-profile conservative decided to share their own experience with media blacklisting, if even one of those past on-air confrontations was proven to have been deliberately orchestrated by the network, then this wouldn't just be about The View anymore. It would be about an entire media industry built on selective outrage, manufactured controversy, and carefully controlled narratives. And that was the kind of battle ABC wasn't prepared to fight. Their worst nightmare wasn't just losing a lawsuit. It was losing the illusion of credibility they had spent years cultivating. The question wasn't whether The View would recover. The question was whether it would survive at all. And for the first time in decades, that answer wasn't just being debated by critics, conservatives, or media watchdogs. It was being whispered inside ABC itself. Karoline Leavitt had done what nobody thought was possible. She had forced one of the most influential media giants in the country to confront its own hypocrisy. And the best part? She was only getting started. Stay tuned. The story of Karoline Leavitt's legal battle against The View and ABC reveals profound messages about accountability, resilience, and the power of truth. One key lesson is that no institution, no matter how powerful, is immune to scrutiny when its actions contradict its stated values. Karoline's refusal to be silenced exposes how unchecked authority can distort narratives and suppress dissent, a reminder that standing firm against injustice, despite overwhelming odds, can spark change. This resonates in everyday life when we confront dishonesty or unfairness, whether in workplaces, relationships, or communities. Persistence and evidence can shift the tide. Another vital takeaway is the fragility of reputations built on hypocrisy. The View thrived on controversy, yet crumbled when its own tactics were laid bare, teaching us that authenticity matters more than curated facades. In our lives, this urges us to prioritize integrity over appearances. True strength lies in aligning actions with principles. Finally, the story underscores the collective power of public support. Karoline's victory wasn't hers alone, but fueled by a movement. Applied personally, this suggests that seeking allies and amplifying truth can turn individual struggles into broader triumphs, fostering hope and resilience in the face of adversity.